Welcome to the AI First Business Podcast with Tina Yazdi, where we show you how companies, teams, and leaders are turning AI hype into ROI. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you want to give us a quick 60-second overview of what's been your journey to DevRev? What's your background and what are you most focused on these days?
Yeah, so I've been working from a product management perspective in AI for over a decade now. I started with a small company called Modernizing, where I was the lead PM, first PM to join that team. We were small, 13 people or so, and got acquired by Salesforce. We specialized in natural language processing and natural language understanding and computer vision. A great team of AI researchers and sort of balanced productization of research with continuous research, especially around the NLP space, because that was probably very early on. From a deep learning perspective, which was cutting edge for NLU and NLP. And when Salesforce acquired us, we continued that endeavor. We continued to create a platform to democratize people's access to cutting edge models and the ability to train and consume those models, and extended that throughout the entire Salesforce platform, both via API and productized applications. I ran the Einstein Voice team, which had three main products for customer support, for sales and sales calling, and then for mobile applications where you could think about a new interface into Salesforce. My team joined Quip and sort of brought together the entire collaboration suite of Quip, which is all about unstructured experiences, documentation, and chat with a modern AI working on that unstructured data. And that's sort of was my experience at Salesforce over a 5 to 6 year period. And when I joined DevRev, I came in to lead the product organization at DevRev. I now am CVP of product and brand with design, marketing, and product all within one organization. And we're a 5-year-old company. I've been here since pretty much the beginning, and we've had an amazing journey. So we've built up an incredibly robust platform in which we run applications, and then a suite of use cases in which our customers across multiple departments leverage DevRev for customer support, for better customer experiences, for enterprise search, and for a modern way to do product management, product development with engineering, design, and PM teams.
Awesome. It sounds like you did a lot of pioneering work at Salesforce. After that experience, what drew you to join DevRev, and how's it shaping your perspective on the future of work? And how are you, through your work, shaping the future of work directly?
Yeah. Well, I loved my time at Salesforce. I think it was an amazing company to work for. We were given the opportunity to take a lot of the cutting edge technology we built at MetaMind and find ways to apply it. And obviously you have an entirely huge install base with hundreds of thousands of customers that are excited to try out new technology. The downside of that, though, is you've got a 20-year-old platform, right? And a now 26-year-old platform. And the technology has changed so much since, they kind of ushered in the era of cloud. And now we have the era of modern compute being available to anyone, new ways to structure your data, and new ways to interact with that. And you need a more modern platform to do that. And so I looked at DevRev as a company that cared a lot about not only the underlying technology that we'd be using to build the applications and the platform that we call Agent OS, but also the way of thinking about design. And that was probably the biggest thing that got me excited. I think, great design is how people will interact with AI. And DevRev has had design as one of the foundations of what we consider our core values in our application building experiences and how users interact with us. So that intersection of enterprise applications, because I do think it's the foundation for, AI's ability to change how we work is a pretty exciting thing to work on. I think we all spend a lot of time at work. We all probably too much time at work for a lot of us, and I hope to make everyone's life a little better for the, 10 plus hours we spend either in the office or working with our colleagues. How can AI can change the way you work, and how can enterprise applications be redefined with AI and with design? And if we can make that really, intuitive, easy to use, and leverage AI from an end user experience perspective, then I think work will be a lot better and it'll get our nights and weekends back.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Digging into that, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the value of design? Are you thinking of human-centered design? And if so, can you give a quick summary of what that means? Or are you thinking about it on different terms?
I think the way we interact with computers is changing dramatically. And if you're going to try to bolt on AI on top of legacy applications, you can kind of expect what the outcome's going to be. Yeah, you're going to see incremental gains. You're going to see users who, one of the greatest learnings I had at Salesforce was we did build a lot of great technology, great experiences on top of the Salesforce platform, though. But the users understand how to use Salesforce and they've had to been trained on that over a 15, 20-year period. It's not a very intuitive platform to use. And then you try to give them a new experience that's transformational. And sometimes those things collide with each other. But if you can really think about what the human's trying to accomplish, to your point of human-centered design, what's their goals, and how can the computer work for them? That's what I think the biggest change that we're going to see in technology is, instead of us using most enterprise applications to update, forms to make sure that our manager has the most important data at their disposal, how can the actual computer help get our job done better, right? How can it guide us on the next best action to take? How can it be making us decision makers, which is really what's most important.
And digging into that further, you've worked on Einstein Voice at Salesforce, and now you're working on Agent OS. Can you briefly explain what both of these products are and what your involvement was with them? And I'd love to understand more, how have they formed your view on AI generally and how they can achieve all these goals that you just outlined?
Yeah, so Einstein Voice is kind of circa 2017. And this is where Alexa had sort of transformed the consumer experience. And we were thinking about the voice modality and the different channels of voice and how that would be, an opportunity, right, to change the user experience. And that was really the new modality, right? We were talking about the idea that a lot of us were on the telephone a lot, and we had kind of three core offerings within Einstein Voice: customer support, which was really about more asynchronous guidance; sales, which was about more for SDRs and how you could do coaching. And then we had a mobile application. And the beauty of a mobile is that we all have a microphone really attached to our hip at all times. And the idea there was, how do we bring an assistant to you that lets you talk to Salesforce? This learning was that, was probably the epiphany I had, that we were going to see new modalities for interacting with computers. Now, we talked a little bit already about some of the inefficiencies that would happen on bolting that on top of an existing platform. And that's where Agent OS really came in, right? Agent OS is what DevRev built from the foundation over the first 3 years of the company. We really started at the platform layer, which is hard for any startup to do. We had to raise a lot of money to be able to give ourselves the time and hire the right people to build
100%.
out that, right? Build this modern stack. And it's not a single thing, right? It's not one database, right? We think about a time series database, a data warehouse, an entity relationship knowledge graph that can empower sort of your ability to then do the capabilities of search and workflow automations and analytics, and how you can actually bring that to the user. So we had to really go from the ground up, an opportunity I didn't have at Salesforce to do. And, it took a new team, a new vision, a new understanding of the technology available to us to bring all this together onto one platform, which we call Agent OS, which powers our agentic experiences and uses these kind of foundational capabilities of, search, workflows, and analytics. To be honest, the SaaS 1.0, though, the early entries into cloud, they never.
What is SaaS 1.0 in your view? Like what era, what companies?
Yes, Salesforce. I would include ServiceNow. I would include, Zendesk. I think about, a lot of the folks that help usher in the ability for people to move from on-prem, legacy applications now, as we think about them, to cloud applications, right? Which moved us from perpetual licenses to subscription licenses, right? And they reinvented a buying behavior, and the idea that you could power up your application in browser. An incredibly powerful technology at that time, but it failed on these sort of fundamental needs of AI. Search, which we've all seen, is sort of probably the most powerful first use case. Workflows, which is how do we drive automations and extend the capabilities of a conversational interface. And then analytics is how do you bring insights from all these data? Those were kind of missing from that first era of SaaS.
Was there, whether in your time at Salesforce or here, a time when a project went sideways? And if so, if whatever example comes to mind, what were some of your takeaways in terms of managing projects around not bolting on AI or doing transformations like this? Do you have any lessons learned that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think about probably in the 2015 to 2000, even probably up to 20. What were some of the big announcements in AI that we saw, right? You had a lot of these big companies, for differing reasons, launching very public AI solutions. And, you think about Microsoft had that T-bot, I think it was on Twitter, that, went a little.
I don't even remember this.
It was, I won't go to the details. You can Google it.
Say it again.
Microsoft Tay was TAY, was the chat bot that you could go on Twitter and you could chat with it, and it would respond to you, and it would have a conversation with you, and it was novel. and being one of the first to sort of reintroduce a very far breath-pacing experience and its ability to converse. But IBM had some healthcare blunders. We've seen self-driving go through its sort of peaks and valleys from a hype cycle perspective. And, I think probably when you look back at some of those, I'd first question sort of the outcome that they really wanted. For example, I think a lot of these, it wasn't necessarily about building the most accurate solution. It was probably about the marketing opportunity of the hype that comes from, maybe showcasing something new in technology that might not be ready. Or they weren't really conditioning people on the user expectations. And that's probably where I saw things go sideways in most of the implementations that didn't find the success that they were looking for. Is like any product building, it doesn't really matter if I was building a technology with AI or building just a great user experience software. It's kind of optimizing for the happy path rather than thinking about the edge cases, right? People don't work as you, or don't use your products as you expect. Would that be because their internet
Isn't
speed?
that the truth?
Yeah. Internet speed could be, really, they might be in a remote area, or they might be an adversarial user, right? They might be actually trying to test your platform. And usually, if you're not coming in expecting the worst behaviors and evaluating whether you deem those to be success, then you're really working under the wrong guidelines. Just like if you were designing an application and you were just expecting everyone to perfectly know that you moved from the top left to the bottom, to the top right, to the bottom left. That's not how humans behave, right? And they don't all think of your application and your software and your website and your product like you do, right? You live and breathe your technology every day. They don't. And you have to think about that a lot when you're building technology. And I think that's probably where we've seen most AI projects go sideways, either having the wrong, expectation or outcome that we would kind of consider to be successful, or being short-sighted in how they expect the user to behave.
Do you have a story from the trenches that you were thinking of as you were describing these edge cases?
I would say I think you have these different types of companies, right? You have larger enterprises that are going to be risk averse, right? And by very nature
rightly so, you can argue, to some degree.
I mean, the stakes are higher for a lot of enterprises. And so, for most of those, it's, who are the stakeholders that are involved really in judging and evaluating success? I've seen people look at stakeholders have thinking AI is a mandate. Right. We are going to implement AI. It's going to change the way we operate as a company. But talent, from 2015 to 2020 was really hard to find. Right. It's changed now in the way that we interact with these models.
And just double clicking on that, when you say talent, I mean what kind of specific talent are you thinking of? Like, are there specific profiles, specific types of engineers? What was specifically in short supply?
Well, before we started consuming foundational models in which, we were really in inference mode. Right. And we were kind of testing this middle layer interaction pattern with prompts, right? And we were layering in foundational models and orchestrating foundational models. People were building models from the ground up, right? And deep learning is a old technology, though, but new in its sort of rebirth, right? In 2015, there was really three things that came together. One was data, 2015, 2014, and ImageNet was sort of the first one, right? Where we had such a large set of images that we could actually throw compute at the problem. Cloud and GPUs gave us that opportunity to throw compute at the problem in ways that we hadn't been able to do before. So there was great AI researchers or deep learning researchers dating back to the 70s and 60s that didn't have the advantages we have over the past 10 years. But talent was the biggest one. So, data, compute, but the investment we saw both from university in their ability to train the next wave of talent that would understand how these models could be built, and enterprises, the big tech companies investing, not just, millions of dollars, billions of dollars in AI, and incentivizing a lot of people from educational institutions to come into the field and apply this to organizations. And so that got hoarded up, right? You weren't going to see a Midwest enterprise company bringing in the best talent in the world to build these models. So then we had to think about, okay, how do you give people access to the model that had been maybe trained 90% of the way, and they would be fine tuning the model. So that was a lot of what was happening, 10 years ago, and, has dramatically changed over the past 3 or 4 years.
Going back to an earlier point of joining DevRev, what DevRev did is not start with a debt of legacy systems and deciding to do it the hard way from building it up from scratch. In that theme, what advice would you give a company starting today on how they should leverage AI and data to get ahead in the next 3 to 5 years, let's say? 10 years seems a little too too long of a horizon.
Yeah, I think I won't quote which company said this, but they said essentially we've tapped our data today, right? The public data that's available to us, and so for you to
sorry, what do you mean by that?
Meaning that majority of the value we are going to get from training on the public knowledge, right? The World Wide Web, the internet's ability to essentially be scraped, indexed, understood by large language models has been, for the most part, done over the past 3 to 4 years. And now I'm kind of looking at, okay, so you have two advantages as a startup. Can you find proprietary data, which is very hard? But, and I'd also start with, though, what's the problem I'm trying to solve for my customers? And get very narrow on that and think about how you're trying to build a company to solve that problem, right? And
so like a first principle.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just team, right? I would not build, and we've done this at DevRev, is build the company the same way. I would probably not think about how I'm writing job descriptions in the same way that I did before. I think jobs are going to change too much. And I think we're seeing people that were generalists thrive in the era of AI, because those are the people that are hybrid, right? They can understand the customer, understand technology. And if you find people that love to learn, love to read, love to understand new technology, they're going to come in with diversity of opinion, diversity of knowledge. They're going to try to look at assumptions. You mentioned first principles. Look at assumptions that we made. And is there a way to rethink these things? That's a lot of what we've done at DevRev, is thinking about the assumptions we made in sales or product development. And, do you need to have these rigid structures of programs, program managers, project managers, scrum masters, product owners, before you get to the actual people who are defining what we actually built, the PMs, or finding or designing what we're building, or writing the code, right? Just to give you the example, I have PMs now on our team that have been trained not just to think about how to build a great AI use case, right?
And what is the assumption that's being dismantled in this example?
That they would define the specs and hand that off to design, hand that off to engineering, right? And there are these stages of development, right? And first off, they're thinking a lot about evaluation sets. How can I even test the idea of what success looks like from this? And eval is probably the most important thing that every PM needs to be learning about, or every person who's working on AI needs to be working on. I don't even say PMs, because I think a lot of these roles are being transformed. Machines are going to do a lot of work for us. So you should expect that you're going to do less of the things that took up 80% of your time. And so for us, that's like, hey, you're going to write doc PRDs in 20 minutes.
So what is a PRD?
A product requirement doc. The specs for someone to think about, the user experience.
Which would take like weeks before everyone had to leave a comment. You had to,
Yeah, and you're going through all these, and you're doing tons of research. You're talking to a lot of customers. I think you're going to spend a lot more time with customers to understand and to validate things. But, there's people on the team now that are saying, I'm working from that, but now I'm actually taking our design language system, which sort of, helps people build new products within our application at a much faster speed, and using that to do rapid prototyping. And there's V0 or sales product. Yeah. And you're able to have a workable prototype, where before you might wait weeks or months to get that prioritized by some other team that's bogged down in bugs and tech debt and maintenance. And I'm testing this with customers, and I've learned something very fast, right or wrong. That is going to make products better. That's going to make customers understand what you're building faster. And, that's a role that, what do you call that? Do you call that a product manager? Do you call that a designer? Do you call that an engineer? I think it's and that's happening in the places where I'm working, the people that I'm working directly with. I'd see that applied across lots of different functions and roles.
In that theme, it sounds like you're very optimistic about the potential of AI in various workflows across different roles. Mm-hmm. Obviously, not everyone shares that sentiment. I've heard a lot of different variations from the extreme, there will never be any jobs left after a certain point, jobs are going to die and everyone's going to be, lost in the mix there, to just kind of like personal concerns of, I don't know how to keep up. I don't know how this is relevant. What do you think is the biggest myth people buy into about the AI taking over jobs, or general fear around AI's impact on the career market?
Yeah. And I think you travel to different parts of the world, and what we hear probably is very different than people are discussing in different parts of even just the US alone. Right. And I think short term, I think change is slow. Right. I think hype cycles have peaks and valleys for a reason. And we're in a hype cycle, and I don't think anyone would doubt that right now.
Where in the hype cycle do you think are we
I
going
think
up?
Differing use cases, I think we've seen, for instance, like I was talking about prototyping, or I was talking about code gen. I think that's gone through its hype cycle. in a lot of ways. And we're seeing exactly where with tools like Cursor and Replit, how you can utilize code gen in a way that will dramatically change how you, now it didn't replace a developer. And I think that is, I think, probably the greatest myth. But we have seen folks that have an AI enable themselves with tools like this move a lot faster and change how they're defining their careers.
And can you break that down as using the developer example? Why does it not replace a developer?
I don't think any company is sitting there and saying, exactly what I guess you fill the jar of things to do based on time, right? And if someone was telling me that,
as well.
We talk a lot about rocks, pebbles, and sand, right? And there's a great video, where a teacher talks about, you could fill the whole jar with sand. Your day's gone. You can start with your big rocks that you want to accomplish, right? And then you can fill it with balls, and then you can fill almost the same amount of sand in there, right? And so I think that's why jobs aren't going to get replaced, because I don't think people are going to say, let's build less. I think they're going to think about, how do we make bigger impact? How do we move faster? And so becoming AI proficient, it's a cliche to say, oh, you're not going to lose your job. AI is not going to take your job. Someone who's proficient in AI will definitely change your job. But I think it's more about reinvention. So how do you think about the craftsmanship skills, the hybrid roles, like I talked about, the generalists, how the generalists will thrive, which I think is exciting because, to work in AI when I started, you needed a PhD. And we would evaluate people by where did you get your PhD from? Not even do you have a PhD, but like what at these schools did you get your PhD from? Seeing people with, dropouts from college that are amazing, drawing amazing insights, thinking about their role as a hybrid and how and the skills and the craftsmanship that they can accomplish.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if part of the intimidation of catching up on AI is a little bit of legacy of that, where AI has this kind of reputation for being difficult, complex, super scientific, or super advanced mathematically. And so I wonder if that association lingering is a barrier for some people to dive in. What do you think?
I like that you said that, because I was talking to someone the other day and they asked me kind of this thing, guys, like what, how are you keeping yourself? I said, one of the first things I had to do was sort of forget a lot of stuff. And I think, in AI in general, right?
In AI in general,
a lot of the assumptions that I built on, how to fine tune a model, how to do, how to label data, right? I would, early on in my career, I would love to have a Friday pizza party with a bunch of developers and we'd sit there and label data, and keep, improve our models that way.
Fun.
Yeah. That was sometimes you got to get in the weeds.
Did you capitalize the C?
Exactly. There's a lot of, what's a sentiment analysis, evaluating sentiment and, all these things. The idea of model improvements and the idea that data is really important, it's never going to change. But the idea that you need to understand the past 10, 15 years of technologies changed a lot, right? And just like it's changed in every sort of major industrial revolution and technology revolution that we've seen, right? There's been greater abstractions from, the root kernel, to think about it that way. And so now people are able to learn a different way of interacting with AI, right? And 2 years ago, it was all about prompts, right? And no one mentioned the word prompt in my mind 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. But, for 2022, it was all about, prompt engineering. That's starting to go away in some ways. And we're seeing new ways to think about how do you orchestrate models? How do you use eval sets to leverage models? How do you think about which models are going to be good per scenario? So, there's 4 or 5 great LLMs right now that can be leveraged between most, the major players here at Google, at OpenAI, at Anthropic, at Facebook with Llama. And so, we're learning a new way of bringing models together, which is, I think, different than someone would have expected 5 years ago.
No, 100%. Why do most of the attempts at AI implementation and automation fail to deliver? And what has changed in the last 5 years that in the next attempt, it might go better based on your observation?
I think the biggest reason that, there's the human side and there's the data side, right? The human side is sort of, we have the greatest control over, in the sense that, do we know what we're trying to accomplish? Do we know what success looks like? Do we know what our fallback plan looks like? Do we know what we think our users are going to expect, right? Whether that be building something that's customer facing like customer support, or they're building something internal facing like enterprise search. But the biggest reason they truly stumble, even if they have perfect alignment, is that their systems and tools are all over the place, right? Over the era of SaaS, as we talked about earlier, most companies have 400 plus SaaS tools. right? Even departments have 20 plus SaaS tools at least because they've actually done what's right. They've invested in the best of breed technology. They're like, oh, it's the tool that I'm going to use, right? And now AI is like, I'm abstracting that tool. And so their data's all over the place. And if your tech stack's fragmented, AI is going to struggle. And so how are you going to organize your data and connect those systems? And it doesn't mean throwing it all on a data warehouse. You have to go beyond that. You have to draw entity relationships between this data because we don't work in silos. You and I work in different departments, but we would actually interact. If we were in the same company on a regular basis because you're learning something, I'm learning something, we're collaborating, and AI doesn't care about your departments at all. AI is like, I'm not here to be like, I have a management structure that I have to think about, right? It is like, I'm going to help you find the best answer possible, help you make informed decisions. And so if you simplify it to that, then you're throwing LLMs at the right problem. LLMs and AI, using them somewhat interchangeably right now, but Gen AI being the biggest sort of hype thing we're talking about. It isn't magic. First off, these are probabilistic systems. Right?
It's not.
They were built to guess the next
It
one.
feels magical.
They've gone well beyond that. And I think, there's things like reasoning that are making them even more powerful. But most importantly, you think about these verbs, right? Classify, cluster, summarize, generate, right? Generating is using a lot of that to make information more accessible, make actions we want to take, be available to us that they wouldn't be available if they were stuck in silent systems. So that is where I see companies are like, well, I want the result. I'm like, well, if you don't have the right sort of inputs, you're never going to expect the right output. And, bad data or data that's dispersed across lots of systems or expecting an LLM to make perfect API calls across lots of different data structures is kind of a recipe for disaster. It's not magic, like we said. So that's probably, what we've tried hardest to do at DevRev, which is it's an unsexy data pipelines, bringing data integrations, and we call them airdrops, but syncing data is paramount to making systems work.
I mean, it's some people might call it unsexy, but it's universal, and it might be unsexy, but that does not make it an easy back of the napkin solution. On that note, what, in your experience, should businesses be thinking about in terms of modernizing their infrastructure to take advantage of technologies like Agent OS or other stuff on the market?
I'd realized that most of what we do as a company, especially since we're kind of talking about this from a business perspective, right? We're not talking about consumer applications. We're talking about how businesses get transformed. They have to realize that keeping data connected and deriving the connections between this data is the first most important thing. Because why a developer is working on something, or why a user session crashed, or why your roadmap items aren't getting delivered on time are all related, right? And so that's the number one thing. And that's why, I think we've seen actually, there's lots of research papers from this that aren't even doing it from a business landscape, but knowledge graphs have been so fun. And, that's an investment that a lot of companies are thinking about right now and that we're talking to, which is how do I invest in a knowledge graph that brings together all my data? And then there's use cases that you start to slap on top of that, whether that be driving automations, whether that be just better search. And I think that, though, without understanding how the LM is going to interact with your data, you're not going to actually start to get to that next layer of early wins, right? Find your early wins because they start to, win stack on win stack on wins if you're actually doing this right.
What do you have for a company to be successful at building an AI agent in a way that adds that business value and the value to their end users, whether that's customer facing or internal?
Yeah. Looking at what we've evolved from bots, right? We're using the word agents, not bots, for a reason, right? And if you look at what bots could have done.
And actually on that, what is the difference between an agent and a bot? Like in my head, it's just like it's an automation, right? But maybe that's a incomplete understanding.
Bots were pretty rigid in how they were created, how they were guided, how they were programmed, right? They were programs, and while they had maybe probabilistic nodes within that program, they were very deterministic of how you went through it. And it's why most chat bots felt a lot like an IVR system, being the telephone you call, press 1 to go to this department, press 2 to go to this. And it was all about a series of prompts and answers and prompts and answers. And if you would have just changed that to menu buttons, which a lot of companies ended up doing because they felt like the natural language actually brought probability, where they were like, wait, probability doesn't actually drive as much value here. Agents aren't being constructed that same way, right? Agents are saying, what are my goals? Right. And people have called these things skills and functions sort of being the tasks that I can complete. Right. But I can group those tasks into skills. And now you're giving a lot more understanding of the breadth that an agent can hold. Because if you can imagine a chatbot was like, I can kind of do 5 things, it was like, again, back
Not
to the
very well,
IVR
but
analogy. Yeah, you can do 5
by the
things
way,
and I'm going to prompt you and I'm going to prompt you. But if you told me an answer, in the first question, I'm still going to ask you the same, question on the 9th turn, what we have, right? And I've studied a lot about user experience during like kind of the bot era. And it was really about optimizing the number of turns, right? The number of turns is every time you ask me a question, I have to answer, you have to ask it. Trying to reduce turns was the number one thing I was thinking about. And it isn't, and it isn't a magical like technology has to get there, but you actually have to, you know, build a less restrictive model. And
right.
agents from a technology perspective has given us that ability to say, hey, there's a goal here. Use whatever information you have. There might be some mandatory things, right? And I might need to push you down a deterministic workflow to get there. But in the end, these are the goals. And goals might stack on each other. Functions might be used. And, you might not need to go back to the user. You might need to go to other systems to fetch information. But the agent's given the ability to act on its own a bit before it has to come back to the user, because it's just less programming. And let's not forget that a lot of the programmers for bots, these weren't AI researchers. These are probably, engineers. A lot of times they were like administratives or operations people. And there you have the complexity of sort of like, what technology do I have available to me, or knowledge do I have available to me to actually program these things? So it's democratized the way to think about it. It's like, think about the goals, think about the tasks, which operations people are very good at, rather than think about the underlying training data to know, what the person's intent is, which is, probably not the best thing in the world to be asking an operations person to generate data.
On your LinkedIn profile, you have several patents that I saw kind of at the bottom. I see internal disambiguation within a virtual agent platform, using unstructured input to update heterogeneous data stores, etc. Can you tell me a little bit more about these patents and what's the story with them?
To me, the most important thing that we're trying to solve for is this conversational interface, right? Can we create a new modality, right? And I say conversational, and I don't say that doesn't mean text, right? I think the modalities of how we interact with computers are changing dramatically. And, we're seeing that with ChatGPT and every other sort of major player in the LLM space, and the ability to converse in a conversational way with an LLM. We're going to see it more and more with voice. I love some of the early sort of voice applications that are being built in these things because they're extremely intuitive. And I think we're going to see it with imagery too. Right. And I think there's actually going to be mixed modal experiences that are coming out. And a lot of that was, thinking about that from an endpoint perspective. And then, the heterogeneous data structures, understanding from an output perspective, because most businesses, and this is where I think a lot of, early startups who are thin layers, I can, spin up a use case very fast, haven't thought about the complexity of enterprise. And the complexity of enterprise really is about customization, right? And you're not going to probably convince as a startup most enterprises to say, oh, there's one way to do things. Don't worry, here it is. Like, they've got business processes, they've got regulation, they've got compliance standards to think about. The type of data they're working on is very complex. So you really need to think about not how I will be building systems that are going to be stock and expect one size fits all, but how can I build this in a customizable way? One of the very early things we thought about was customizable embeddings, right? How do I bring in the lexicon of an organization into the model so that I can actually understand their human language? Because even within every department, every company, we say things different. The words have different semantic meaning for us. And so we build a custom semantic database for every organization that uses us, because there's advantages to that in the ways that you can interact with these systems.
100%. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Oh, all right.
Ready? Okay. What are 3 red flags that an AI project is headed for failure?
I think when you say AI, I think about probabilistic systems, and I've had companies come in and say, I'm a 5.9 accuracy expectations, right? This is what success looks like, and they do that at breadth. So it's kind of a combo. We'll call it 1-2. Is they're like, I want perfect precision, and I want it to do it on these 100 use cases. And I think the most important thing is companies come in and they think about, how do I start small? How do I find value? And I know I can actually drive additional use cases on that if I'm investing in the right platform, right? You're not going to want to invest in AI in 100 different platforms. And that's the other red flag, is when they're like, oh, I don't need to think about this at a platform level because I'm doing this through the 400 SaaS solutions I've bought the AI add-on. I don't think AI should be an add-on. I think it should be really driven through value outcomes and how you pay for it and how you consume it. And it needs to be invested in at a platform layer because, like I said, it's not going to care about your departments. It's not going to care about the tools. It just really needs the best data available to it. And yes, hopefully we're helping usher in that those great systems.
What are 3 things leaders can do next week to make their engineering and product teams more collaborative?
I like this one. Empower them with the right tools, right? And every organization, engineering might be different than product, and product might be different than design, but find ways to say that at the minimum, depending on their risk tolerance, experiment, right? Empower them to find time to experiment with these tools because there is a learning curve and there's change that occurs with most people and especially very seasoned people. But, I've been loving, there's like a lot of folks that I've seen that are doing like the 40 days of AI challenges and things like that. Find ways to experiment, find ways to learn about these tools, rethink your organizational structure, rethink about how rigid your processes are, how problems get prioritized. Do you give people, the ability to say, you know what, I'm not in a pod engineering structure. I'm not locked out of, working on the most important thing for the company. And then, you said the word collaboration, which I love because I think people need to share. If you give people the channels and the opportunity to share how they're learning, they'll learn faster. They'll learn from each other. It doesn't need to be structured classes. There's so many tools available to you right now, and there's so many free tools available to you right now. Find ways to experiment, to run a project, to do something on a weekend, and then take that to the team and share your learnings because those things usually have compounding outcomes for each other.
100%. What would be your advice to someone wanting to future-proof themselves in their career against things like agents, automation, AI?
I don't think it's, I think I said this at the beginning. I don't think AI is going to take your job, but I think you got to think about how you're going to leverage AI, right? And if you should look at anything that you hang your hat on as the reason why you drive the most value and question it. Just question if a machine could do this and understand too that 5 years ago, I never thought machines would be creating great artwork, writing poetry, right? So there's assumptions that you might have to be able to I think that's what's most important is how are you kind of constantly learning? How are you challenging what you think is the most important role that you bring to the table? And, in that way, I don't think of myself as a great designer, but I love design, right? I love talking to designers and I love learning about it. And so how do you bring that sort of generalist mindset, the soft skills that are going to be really important going forward? It's not always IQ. A lot of times it's EQ that really sets the best employees apart. I don't think machines are going to develop the best EQ in the world. And so if that's a way you can try to drive advantage for yourself, I've always found IQ and EQ mixed together is really an unbeatable force.
I completely agree with that. And just kind of to end things off, are there any books, publications, or content that you like to follow and you've learned from yourself that you can recommend to people listening?
Oh, I gotta maybe
around the topic of what we're talking about today, or if you have a random recommendation, we're here for it.
It's probably it might not be directly applicable, but it is so important in company building. Is there's a book I recently read, Unreasonable Hospitality.
Unreasonable Hospitality.
Yes, and it just takes you through, a restaurateur's thinking about
interesting
delivering great customer experiences. Not always thinking about. He talks about sometimes the best meal he ever served wasn't about the food, right? It was about the experience that he gave an individual who had never dined at a fancy dining restaurant, before. And, I think we all have to think about that a lot because a lot of times we have a tendency in the Silicon Valley and tech in general to think it's all about. And in the end, if you bring this kind of notion of unreasonable hospitality to your users, to the customers and prospects you talk to, and you think about how you're delivering that to your customers even. There's sometimes takes you a little bit out of the hype cycles a bit and realize what's really important in life.
A Michelin star restaurant.
Yeah. Gotta eat good food. That's all. That's
gotta eat good food. Life. No, that's a great recommendation. I had not come across it before.
Good book, and he's a great writer, great speaker, and great chef.
Well, we would hope so. So I will definitely link that in the episode notes. Michael, thank you so much for joining today, sharing your story, sharing your expertise, and what you're building at DevRev. I'm sure this will help a lot of people orient themselves in the world of agents, AI, automation, and workflows.
Tina, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you've gained value from this episode, please drop us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like on YouTube. See you for the next one.